coming up on The World Today. It's day 4 of mass anti-coup protests in Myanmar as police try to scatter the crowd. The impeachment trial of former U.S. President Donald Trump begins today. The WHO investigating team in China says the coronavirus could not have leaked from a lab in Wuhan. A warm welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. You're watching The World Today, and I'm Akaite Afia here in Lagos. Another day of protests in Myanmar, and this time, police authorities are trying to stop the protesters using water cannons and tear gas. There have been reports of live bullets being used, but not yet confirmed. It appears the people of Myanmar want the military out and for their civilian leadership restored.
It's day 4 of the protests, which first began over the weekend, but has continued since Saturday. Defying a ban on large gatherings, tens of thousands of people gathered chanting anti-coup slogans. Since Monday, police have been applying the use of force to make the protesters disappear. In the capital, Naypyidaw, they fired in the air, scattering throngs of protesters. 4 people were hurt by rubber bullets. One of them was in critical condition with a head wound. Earlier, they blasted protesters with a water cannon embargo. In the city of Mandalay, Myanmar's second largest, protesters marched the streets demonstrating against the military coup. Authorities continue to repeat warnings for protesters to disperse or face force. They have arrested at least 27 protesters already. International condemnation of the military takeover are now being accompanied with sanctions. New Zealand today announced it was suspending all high-level political and military contacts with Myanmar. The country will also impose a travel ban on the country's military leaders and ensure that its aid program to Myanmar will not include projects that are delivered with or benefit the military government.
New Zealand is suspending all high-level political and military contact with Myanmar.
Prime Minister Ardern also says New Zealand will be imploring on the United Nations Human Rights Council on the impact of the coup.
In addition, we've joined with other countries calling for a special session at the United Nations Human Rights Council on Myanmar to raise concerns regarding the military coup and the impact on human rights. And I can assure you that New Zealand will continue to monitor closely the situation in Myanmar as it continues to unfold.
On Monday, the U.S. State Department declared its stand with the people of Myanmar.
That we stand with the duly elected representatives of the people of Burma in their efforts to speak for the people of the country. We join them in demanding the immediate and full restoration of the democratically elected government. We stand with the people of Burma, support their right to assemble peacefully, including to protest peacefully in support of the democratically elected government, and the right to freedom of expression, including the freedom to seek, to receive, to impart information both online and offline.
There have been reports of some policemen joining in the protests as well, but these reports have been unconfirmed. The security operatives' response is being seen as mild for now when compared to previous protests in 1988 and in 2007, in which demonstrators were even killed.
The impeachment trial of former U.S. President Donald Trump begins today, and we're understanding that this will be a brief trial. There will be 4 hours for both sides to present their arguments today about whether the trial is constitutional, followed by a vote. Trump's lawyers say the trial is unconstitutional because Trump has left office and is now a private citizen. Arguments for the trial begin tomorrow, with each side being given 16 hours over the following days. And by the weekend, opening arguments are expected to be over, and senators will be able to pose questions on both sides. Interestingly, politicians on both sides say they want a speedy trial. Just yesterday, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer laid out the framework for the trial.
California is recognized.
Let me say that again. All parties have agreed to a structure that will ensure a fair and honest Senate impeachment trial of the former president. Each side will have ample time to make their arguments, 16 hours over 2 days for the House managers, the same for the former president's counsel. If managers decide they want witnesses, there will be a vote on that, which is the option they requested in regard to witnesses. The trial will also accommodate a request from the former president's counsel to pause the trial during the Sabbath. The trial will break on Friday afternoon before sundown and will not resume until Sunday afternoon.
Well, let's get some more understanding now from the VOA's Carolyn Prasuti. Carolyn, thanks for joining us on the show today.
My pleasure.
So it is a big day in the Capitol. Give us a sense of some of the arguments Congress will be going over in the course of the coming days.
Absolutely. Well, the big question is, did former President Donald Trump incite a riot at the Capitol that led to 5 deaths? Yes or no? So if you imagine this like a criminal trial, you have the prosecution in the House managers who will try to prove that, yes, indeed, his words that he spoke to the group before they went to the Capitol were inciting a riot. Now, his defense attorneys, the defense, as in a criminal trial, will say that no, he has free speech, and he was able to give that speech. The freedom of speech, our beloved amendment to the Constitution. They say that he has free speech, and it was a form of speech. He didn't necessarily mean to literally fight. He meant to just fight for your rights. So therein lies the question, did he incite the riot or did he not incite the riot? Also, the former president's attorneys will say that this protest was planned long before the president gave that speech. So he in himself did not prompt those rioters to go to the Capitol and commit the violations that they did.
Well, as far as we know, the only thing Congress has agreed on at this moment is the length of the trial, but they're still very divided over the legitimacy of the trial itself, with Republicans saying it's unconstitutional because Trump is no longer president. So does it appear an easy argument is to had over this, or does it sound more like they're trying to absolve him of blame for what happened in the Capitol on January 6th?
Well, that is the controversy, isn't it? Is this trial indeed a violation of the Constitution? Is this constitutional at all to be holding this trial? And that is the argument that we made today for the first 4 hours of the trial, which gets underway in about an hour and a half now, with the president's attorney saying, no, you cannot convict a former president. The Constitution only allows for a current president to be impeached and then to be brought to conviction. Whereas the defense attorneys, the House managers, will say, oh, no, there has been a precedent. And they will look back to 1876 when a former Secretary of War was brought before the Senate in an impeachment trial. So you'll have both of them then arguing their case after the 4 hours today. They will break for the night. On Wednesday, they'll return with 16 hours of arguments, of opening arguments by the defense, opening arguments by the prosecution. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the defense's, or rather the prosecution's argument, those House impeachment managers. They will bring forth a lot of videos that day. They will try to make the senators, remember the senators are like the jury in this trial, they will make them feel like they were back on January 6th, that they were seated, that they were in their offices, and the fear that they felt during that riot. They will also bring forth a lot of social media posts. Meantime, the defense, the president's attorneys, will say, no, that wasn't brought forth by the president, again, stating that he is not to blame. Whether or not we have witnesses remains to be seen. That will be voted on should the prosecution, the impeachment managers, decide to bring it forward. And if those witnesses come forward, they're expected to be Capitol Hill police officers and people who were with President Donald Trump that day at the White House when the riot occurred.
Well, you did mention that they're going to try to have them relive the fear that they felt that day. And Carolyn, we know that things can get messy here. Members are already having to deal with internal wranglings, such as gun carrying in the House, and relieving some members of their duties in some of the committees. So how much of an impact could this have on the impeachment trial?
Well, it's a given that, and I think you have reported this over and over again, as have a lot of American television stations, that we do have a partisan divide in this country, and we have a partisan divide right up there on the Hill. President Joe Biden ran on the campaign that we need to get together. We need to have bipartisan legislation. We are still seeing a lot of acrimony on the Hill. So this, a lot of people say we need a speedy trial to get this behind us. We need to concentrate more on the issues at hand, getting the president's cabinet in, getting that $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill passed. They want this behind us. They want to move forward. Others say no, president, be it former or current, needs to be held accountable for his or her actions.
Well, as you mentioned, we are just an hour and a half out of this, so we will be keeping an eye on the situation. But Carolyn, thanks again for joining us.
My pleasure.
The WHO team investigating the origins of the coronavirus says it's unlikely the virus came from a laboratory in the Chinese city of Wuhan. Head of the team, Peter Emberek, says the work, however, needs to be done to identify the source of the virus. He did say they had uncovered new information, but that it had not dramatically changed the picture of the outbreak. There are now more than 106 million cases of the coronavirus globally, with more than 2.3 million deaths. Here's more in the Global Update.
Mr. Ben Emberek's comments comes as the WHO ends its investigations in China over the origins of the coronavirus. The team concluded that the cause of COVID-19 could have been circulating in other regions before it was identified in the central Chinese city of Wuhan. It also ruled out the possibility of the virus leaking from a lab in the city.
The findings suggest that the laboratory incident hypothesis is extremely unlikely and to explain the introduction of the virus into the human population.
Meanwhile, around the world, vaccine inoculations are continuing. Iran has launched a vaccination drive against COVID-19, focusing initially on hospital intensive care personnel as the hardest hit country in the Middle East awaits enough vaccines for its general population. Iran's health minister, Sahid Namaki, presented his son, Passer Namaki, to be the first person to be inoculated in an apparent effort by officials to boost public confidence in Russia's Sputnik V vaccine. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says more than 97% of COVID deaths in the country over the past month were people who had not been vaccinated. His government is trying to increase turnout for the Pfizer shots. Around 38% of Israel's 9 million population have received at least one vaccine dose, according to the health ministry. But government's goal of achieving 50% coverage and reopening of the economy next month have been challenged as the daily vaccination pace slows. Over in Europe, Austria is stepping up its response to an outbreak of the South African variant of the coronavirus in its alpine province of Tyrol by requiring those living in the province to show a negative coronavirus test. The national government and the provincial government of Tyrol, both led by the Conservative People's Party, have been at odds over how aggressively to respond to the outbreak that threatens to scupper the country's vaccination plans. Finally, Britain says it will bring in tighter border controls next week against new variants of the coronavirus, requiring hotel quarantine for arrivals and threatening rule breakers with up to 10 years in jail and fines. Under lockdown rules, holidays are banned and testing regimes and quarantine are already in place for travelers, but the government says it will bring in extra measures due to the risk of new variants on which vaccines may not work.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has called for the adjustment of COVID-19 vaccines to factor in the new strains of the virus. Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus also called for the rollout and vaccine manufacturing to be scaled up in order to protect people before they are exposed to new variants.
The emergence of new variants of the virus has raised questions about the potential impact of those variants on vaccines. Yesterday, South Africa announced that it was putting a temporary hold on the rollout of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine after a study showed it was minimally effective at preventing mild to moderate disease caused by a variant first identified in South Africa. This is clearly concerning news. It also seems increasingly clear that manufacturers will have to adjust to the evolution of the virus, taking into account the latest variants for future shots, including boosters.
Still to come on The World Today. Ever been so upset that you wanted to scream? Well, it turns out screaming itself could be therapeutic. Stay with us for more. Thanks for staying with us. You're watching The World Today on Channels Television. 2 days after rescuers are still searching for those trapped in a tunnel following Sunday's dam disaster. Let's remember, scores of people are still missing, at least 200 for now. Earlier today, they recovered one more body from the glacier disaster in Uttarakhand, placing the death toll at 29. Officials also began using thermal imaging equipment on helicopters to search for the missing. Elsewhere, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has responded to the United States Secretary of State's remarks about the Golan Heights, stopping short of recognizing it belonged to Israel. During a press conference today, Mr. Netanyahu said Israel will keep Golan Heights forever. Back in 2019, then U.S. President Donald Trump parted with other world powers by recognizing the Golan Heights as Israeli. Israel occupied the strategic plateau in a 1967 war with Syria and annexed it in 1981. Blinken said on Monday he saw control of the Golan, which overlooks northern Israel and also borders Lebanon and Jordan, as being, quote, of real importance to Israel's security, but was circumspect about recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the territory. Academics say the fate of future research into the actions of Poles during the Holocaust could be set today in a court ruling on a case that pits two leading historians against an elderly litigant. In a country where close to 3.2 million Jews are estimated to have died during more than 5 years of Nazi rule, the events of World War II remain politically charged. A significant body of research suggests that while thousands of Poles risked their lives to help Jews, thousands also participated in the Holocaust. But Poland's governing Nationalist Law and Justice Party, or PIS, said it views any investigation into complicity by Poles in the wartime slaughter of Jews as dishonoring the country.
Narrative of that we here in Poland did only good things, no one did anything bad, which is clearly not the case in any country or any people, any ethnic group. Here people did good things, people did bad things. And this tendency to kind of, revisionism that no one could ever do anything bad here is simply a falsification of history. And first and foremost, it's bad for Poland. It's bad for the soul of Poland. Because if you cannot face the bad things that you have done in the past, it limits the chances of you ever becoming better in the future.
Nearly 4 years into their odyssey at sea, the 5-member crew of oil tanker MT IBA is tantalizingly close to shore, yet still unable to set foot on dry land. Beery-eyed and wearing tattered clothes, the men are exhausted from an ordeal that has kept them from their families and aboard the 5,000-ton vessel long after its owner abandoned it in the Gulf. When it started out as a regular seafaring job, turned into what the men call a nightmare. When the tanker's owner, Alco Shipping, fell into financial trouble and stopped paying their salaries 32 months ago. The crew has been left to fend for itself, relying on donations from charities they contacted for food and hygiene supplies.
Yeah, so the MT IBA has been what in the technical term is called abandoned for just over 2.5 years. You're abandoned on a ship when for 2 months or more you're not paid your wages or not provided with provisions. In this case, that's gone on way beyond that. And we've been involved with them since almost they first were abandoned when they made touch with us at the Mission to Seafarers here in Dubai. Therefore, they get into a stalemate because the only collateral that the crew have is the vessel. The second issue that the crew have is it's illegal for them to physically abandon the ship. if they physically abandon the ship and come to port in their life craft, then they too could be detained as illegal entrants. They don't have visas for the UAE, their passports are currently with the company.
Russia says discussing sanctions against Russian citizens with the West can be made illegal by the parliament. The comment was made by the government spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, asking that this initiative would meet the great support of Russians. The allies of jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny have urged Western envoys to impose sanctions on senior Russian business and political figures, judges, and security chiefs during a video call. EU foreign ministers are set to meet on February 22nd to consider their response to Navalny's jailing last week. And U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has said that Washington will coordinate to hold the Kremlin accountable. With lockdowns and COVID-19 restrictions hampering normal activities, it's easy to get frustrated and want to take it out either on the people around us or on things. There is a much, fulfilling way. Have you tried screaming? It's what many Israelis are doing now as they seek both communion and emotional release from being burned out by COVID-19 confinement. So while some Israelis take part in street demonstrations, others take to nature and shout to the heavens. Some say they scream a prayer, hopeful that God will release them from the curse of the pandemic. A group of people have been meeting regularly, standing in choric proximity as they remove their masks, drawing looks from passers-by and police, and then they let out a good scream.
Shouting is known in yoga and in Tai Chi, which I'm practicing, to take out all the frustration and bad spirits from the body and the mind. And that's why today we are shouting freedom.
Our group met to be together for the big scream, because when you do it in a group, it's like a prayer when you pray together. And maybe God will hear us and will release us from this COVID-19 curse, and the scream is to release us from the frustration and from the lockdown that we carried with us all this year.
Well, it is a sad day for the music industry as Mary Wilson, a founding member of the Supremes, has died at the age of 76. According to her publicist in a statement, Wilson died suddenly at her home in Henderson, Nevada on Monday. Wilson, a singer as well as best-selling author, helped form female singing group The Primettes in Detroit in 1959, alongside Diana Ross, Florence Ballard, and Betty McGlown. The latter left the group and was replaced. Wilson, Ross, and Ballard went on to enjoy huge success as the trio The Supremes. Under the Motown Records label, the group scored 12 #1 hits with songs like Baby Love and Stop in the Name of Love, and still remains influential decades later. Wilson stayed on with the Supremes even after their original members had left and new ones joined the lineup. The group split in 1977 and she pursued a solo career. The Supremes were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1988. That is all we have for the program today. Thank you so much for staying with us. I'm Akaite Afia. Have a great evening and stay safe.